Right now on the Rise to the Top podcast, a man who needs no introduction, Mr. Dr. Professor Pat Flynn. But guess what? I'm going to give him one anyway. And welcome, my friends. It's your great and good friend, David Siteman Garland, a.k.a. DSG. Welcome to the Rise to the Top podcast. And just like I said, this man needs no introduction, but guess what? He's going to get one anyway. Mr. Pat Flynn joining me here today on the podcast. As promised, if you listened to the last episode where I broke down my podcast behind the scenes, and I talked about the technology and what software we use and what microphones in my workflow. And what I mentioned is that when it comes to podcasting, I'm no expert. I'm a course creator. I am a business owner, but I have a podcast, but I'm not a podcasting expert. Pat Flynn is a podcasting expert, bar none. And I've known Pat now going back to, I believe, 2009, give or take, when he was also starting his business. Mine started 2008. I actually think he started in 2008 as well. And over the years, as Pat's brand, Smart Passive Income, has grown, and Pat has just absolutely exploded. You could see him keynoting different things. You can see him with numerous podcasts. He's taken over YouTube lately. It's Pat Flynn party everywhere. But where Pat really has a passion and a drive is podcasting. He lives and breathes it, and he just understands it. He understands what's going on in the marketplace. He understands how you can implement this for your business. And it's funny because I mentioned this again in the last episode. You can go back and check that out at therisetop.com/episode 13. And now we're here on episode 14, is that I mentioned that people were sending me tons and tons and tons of questions about podcasting, how to build an audience, how to use it for your business. Because here's the thing, podcasting is an incredible tool for personal brands. So whether you're a coach, consultant, have an online platform, online course creator, whatever it might be, having a podcast, when done correctly, can be an absolute beast mode, my friend. So I figure we bring in Pat here today on the show, bring on Pat, and really break down lots of different things about podcasting. And by the way, I mentioned this last week, I want to mention it again. We are hosting, or I am hosting Pat for an absolutely free podcasting workshop, which you can sign up for at therisetop.com/learn-to-podcast. And that's going to be incredible. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a completely badass training, 9 strategies to creating, promoting, and monetizing a successful podcast that grows your influence and income. So make sure to sign up for that at therisetop.com, learn to podcast. So in this conversation with Pat, we're going to cover pretty much anything and all things podcasting. We're talking about how he got into it, how it's evolved, what it's like now in 2018 as opposed to what it was like years ago, right? So the climate has changed with podcasting, right? We're going to talk about any pivots and changes that he's made with his shows, advice for you on growing an audience and getting a show started and all that kind of good stuff. How do you sell on a podcast? How do you market it? All that delicious goodness coming up right now. Without further ado, let's do it. Alrighty, folks. So now I'm joined by my great and good friend, Dr. Professor Pat Flynn. How are you, Pat?
Dr. Professor, what's up?
You like that intro? You didn't see that coming.
Not on paper, but sometimes I feel like a doctor. I'm kind of doing surgical analysis on how to get better online.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, well, we'll give that to you. That sounds good to me.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a stretch, but
so we're talking podcasting today, and this is something you're obviously very passionate about this, and you're a guy similar to me. You have a pretty, I would say you have a relatively addictive personality, Pat, meaning like when you get into something, you go all in. Is that fair to say?
This is true. Pokemon cards, Pogs, Magic the Gathering, marching band, music. Yeah, all the things.
Anything. You're all in. And I get it. And by the way, I was big into Pogs and a little Magic back in the day. So that's a fun fact for everybody. But we're talking podcasting here today. Now, currently, as we're doing this in 2018, tell us about your scope of your podcast right now. You've got a couple different shows, but tell us kind of what you have going on with that. And then we're going to go all the way back and kind of bring us up to date.
Yeah, actually, there's more than a couple shows. I have 5 podcasts.
Oh, just 5. That's it?
Just 5. And the latest one that just came out June 1st is a podcast with my boy, my 8-year-old boy. It's called All of Your Beeswax. He comes home from school. He goes to a school where they teach kind of entrepreneurship and stuff, which is really amazing. But I wanted to capture all of his energy after school. And so I just, turn the recorder on and we jam for a little bit. I help him figure out some stuff. He interviews me sometimes. And I just decided to, share that to hopefully inspire other parents to talk to their kids about entrepreneurship and vice versa. And it's so much fun. And, setting up a podcast is not as technically hard as it used to be. But, I've gone through this process a few times. So, there's a whole thing related to the launch and stuff. And so far, it's just been getting some incredible feedback. And, so there's that show. But, most people know me from Smart Passive Income podcast. And that's been around since 2010, July 2010. And so, we're really close to my 8-year anniversary with that. But we're just over the 50 million downloads mark with just that podcast alone, which is just, it blows my mind. Because, I'm just here in my home office recording. And then, every time I come out with a new episode, it's essentially like if you imagine me standing in the middle of a football stadium with 100,000 seats, full capacity, and they're there to listen to me every single time. And it just blows my mind. I have another show called AskPat where I do like a half-hour coaching call once a week with somebody who applies to get coaching. And that's kind of nice because people can kind of hear my process for how to dig into what the problems and pains are with different people's businesses. And I have another show called One Day Business Breakthrough, which was a co-hosted show with my friend Chris Ducker. And finally, a show that's very niched in the food truck industry. So I have a food truck website that I started as an experiment a few years back. It's making a couple $1,000s a month with some books that were published and stuff. But the podcast has actually been the primary driver for business there because food truckers, they don't have time to read, so they listen. Even though each episode only gets maybe like 500 downloads, like if you imagine parking up to a spot and having 500 food truck owners like just sit and listen to you for a little bit. I mean, it really puts perspective into like the power behind getting behind the microphone. And obviously people are listening to us right now and are learning and getting inspired hopefully. So man, it's just been it's actually I did surveys, and every time I go to a conference, it's always the number one thing, the number one way that people have found me, the number one thing people talk about. Even when I started podcasting back in 2010, I was blogging 3 times a week. And I was podcasting once every other week. But I went to this conference and people could not stop talking about the podcast. They're like, I love that show or that story you told, or man, that was so funny, or I learned so much from that. And I'm like, what about the blog though? Like I blog so much more. And
no, nobody we don't care about that. Just give us the podcast.
Yeah, nobody ever goes up to me and goes, that blog post you wrote 2 years ago about your 5 favorite Facebook tips. Like nobody ever says that, but everybody goes, man, that story that you told about the time when you had your son and you didn't have insurance, like that really spoke to me and helped me. And that's really what podcasting is great at. It's a storytelling platform and it's so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, a fantastic point that you made is that when people hear your millions of downloads, in my original show, we also had millions of downloads, and this one will have, 7 zillion downloads when you have Pat Flynn on, right? Obviously. But it is where I think people miss the point is exactly what you said about the food trucking podcast, right? Is that let's just say someone gets a couple hundred views or listens, downloads, a couple hundred or even less or a little bit more. You got to realize now, imagine that you're sitting in a room with those exact people that are your target market or your audience or whatever it might be. And you're in their ear, literally. Yeah. And that's one of the amazing things. I think people sometimes, just like with online courses, they get caught up in the launch. Like, oh my God, I didn't make $7 zillion. It's a fail. No, not at all. It's all about, it's a relative situation when it comes to this. Second, Pat, was that's very interesting about people coming up to you, because I actually feel the same way. And it's interesting that I don't get, and maybe this is different for you, right? Sometimes I don't get a ton of online comments about my podcasts, which are interesting. Like sometimes I do, like meaning, on Facebook or email, I get a few here and there, but it's the same thing. When I run into people, it's amazing. I mean, seriously, I'm like, I just assumed no one was listening. No, I'm just kidding. I know other people are, but people somehow connect with this medium. And my question for you with that is, why do you think that is? And you mentioned kind of the stories, you mentioned this and that, and how it compares to like a blog or YouTube or different things. Why do you think that this medium is as powerful or as memorable as it is?
it's because of the way that people consume it. People are consuming podcasts on the go, in their car, on a plane ride, on a walk with the dog, or even at the gym, in spaces where no other platforms can really enter a person's life. And because of that, people are listening for much longer. I mean, the data shows it. On YouTube, for example, if you have a video and it's watched for more than 5 minutes, you're doing really good.
Right. It's a miracle. Right.
That's a really good watch time. When a person's reading your blog post, if they read the whole thing word for word, that's a miracle, because most people skip around and jump around. But also, they might leave the page or go somewhere else. And when you think about it, like YouTube's job is to like get people into other videos. So there's suggested videos, there's ads, there's all these things you can click on to remove yourself from that initial video. With blogs, I mean, same thing, ads and other things you can click on. When a person listens to your podcast and you hook them right away and you tell them why they need to stick around, the magic moment is this: when they take that device and they put it in their pocket, and then they're with you, like you said, in their ear. It's so intimate. Even though as podcasters we share a podcast and it gets sent out to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people, to the individual listener, it's a one-on-one experience, and that's why it's so powerful, because it feels like they're speaking just to you. So this is exactly why, David, that you're not getting a lot of comments online, because people aren't online when they're consuming you.
They're walking around. They're in the car. They're at the gym. They're this or that. They're not sitting there literally like we are as we record this. They could be anywhere, and that is, oh man, that's a fantastic point. I never thought about that, Pat.
And the data shows that, because now we have analytics for this now coming from iTunes and Apple, people are listening to 90% to 100% of your podcast episodes, which in podcasts are much longer form typically. I mean, your shows are 30 to 45 minutes. Sometimes mine go an hour and a half, and a person is spending an hour with you every single day in a place where nobody else can interrupt that thing unless your kids are tugging on your shirt and you're like, what is it? No, I'm just kidding.
Get out of here. That's why we have tranquilizer darts. It's no big deal.
This podcast is so important. No, but really, and then here's the thing: people are on average subscribed to 5 different podcasts. So there's it's not competition. Like, people usually have their 1 or 2 YouTube channels that they watch, but that's it. But with podcasts, like, people are subscribed to average 5. I've seen some people who I look at their podcast app and they're subscribed to 20 to 30 podcasts, and they're consuming it Netflix style, binging, listening whenever they have a free moment, which is, people have a lot of free time in the car. Commuters are traveling an hour and a half average every single day in the US, and there's 143 million commuters. Like, that could be them listening to you and your show and your message. I mean, hopefully they're not watching YouTube or reading blog posts in the car, but they can listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic point. And now, by the way, of course, as cars and phones continue to evolve too, it just makes it that much easier. I mean, my wife, God bless her, who's a physician, actual doctor, she is not, I wouldn't call her, she would say this if she was sitting here too, the most tech savvy. My joke is that she's like 150 years old, right?
Oh yeah. My wife says she's pretty Amish.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Like, she's got a car. We're just happy she could turn on the car and drive it to work, right? But she figured out how to get podcasts. She's listening to podcasts in the car. I mean, and I'm telling you, when I look at that, I'm like, oh my God, mind explosion to a certain degree. And that's a great point about consumption, because I think about this when I'm doing let's say I'm reading someone's blog post or watching a video. YouTube, a lot of times I'm clicking around. I'm having a very ADD stuff. Blog posts, I'll start, go have lunch. Maybe I'll read it later. But I feel like when I want to listen to a podcast, I'm much more of a creator than a consumer, just my own personality. But when I want to listen to one, I have to kind of commit to it. Meaning, I'm like, I don't really want to listen to 10 minutes and come back and listen to 40 minutes later. I want my 50 minutes and listen to the whole thing. That's a great point in terms of that. Now, going back to 2010 for you, Pat, and, I got started barely when it was even called podcasting in 2008. What first got you into it? What attracted you into that? And what was your first kind of motivation for getting it going?
Actually, initially, I wanted to start a podcast in 2008. So I had just started smartpassiveincome.com because I built a successful business helping people in the architecture industry pass an exam. And that was my first online business. Actually, was coming off of a layoff from the architecture industry. So that happened. That became very successful. A lot of people had asked me how I built this business in the architecture space online. So I created smartpassiveincome.com in October of 2008. And the reason that I started at all online was because of a podcast that I listened to, or I heard an interview about a guy that was helping people pass the project management exam. He was making six figures doing it. That was it was a life-changing moment to hear that podcast and hear that story and get inspired and be like, oh, I could do that too, maybe. And then it happened. And so I always knew that I wanted to start a podcast of my own because it made such a huge impact on my life. And so on smartpassiveincome.com in December of 2008, I had bought all this equipment and I recorded my first ever audio file and shared it on my website. And on the website, it said, it was a terrible, I actually still have that audio file. Maybe I could even give it to you to share at the end or something, because it's just terrible, just to kind of give you a sense of where I was. But it played this rock music, and then it was me saying, hey guys, I might start a podcast soon. Get ready for it. It's good. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I have no idea what's going to happen. And so that was December of 2008. My first episode didn't come out until July of 2010. So a year and a half later. And the reason why it took so long was, number one, it was the tech stuff. Nobody was teaching podcasting at the time, really. And so I just got very scared of it. Podcasting initially was created by a bunch of tech nerds who knew how to code and all that stuff.
When I got into it, the barrier of entry was pretty high. Right now it's not at all. But back then, exactly, it was very much like This Week in Technology with Leo Laporte. It was the nerdiest of the nerdy, the techie of the techie that were able to figure this out. We could turn the internet into the radio. That's how it started. And now it's obviously evolved a lot since then.
Right, because it required a lot of coding and all this stuff. So, back then that was part of it. But the real part of it was because I was just scared of what people were going to think about my voice. I was scared if people were even going to listen to me. So every time I got started and tried this new thing called podcasting, I immediately just shelled up and went back to what I was comfortable doing, which was blogging. And it wasn't until I had some friends who were doing really well with podcasting who were just like, Pat, you just got to do it. Figure it out. It's not going to be great. And yeah, I recorded my first episode 3 times just because I wasn't happy with it. I even scripted it out and scrapped that because when I re-listened to that, I put myself to sleep. And I just said, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go and do it. And the first episodes I created are bad. Most people would say, oh yeah, they're okay. But for me, I'm like, man, that's not, and for me as a perfectionist, it's ugh. But I got going and the second episode was better than the first one. Then I had my first interview and that was oh, I wish I asked different questions. But you get better and better and better. And part of my goal now is to just make podcasting as easy as possible for people, because it has been so life-changing for me, both as a consumer of podcasts back before I even started, now as a producer of podcasts, having people reach out to me who I didn't even know existed, who have learned from me, whose lives have changed as a result of listening to my show from all over the world. And now as a person helping other people start podcasts, I can sort of pay it forward and have them experience that too.
I love it. And it's funny because now podcasting's evolved big time. Right, since 2010, especially since 2008. And it's funny that you mentioned a few of the ways. One, the tech barrier is basically obsolete, to say the least. It's not that there's none. It's just that compared to where it was at, anyone could really do it. Number 2 that you mentioned was that now the ease of consumption between iTunes and Stitcher and cars that are making things easier. Right. It used to have to be a double sell. Right? You had to kind of explain to people, this is what a podcast is. And by the way, now you should listen to mine. Right? It'd be like trying to explain to someone, this is what a website is. Now go visit mine. Right? And that's a pain in the butt. Now it's very mainstream. People know what it is. A lot of mainstream celebrities have one, things like that. Now I want to ask a 2-part question here, Pat, a little conversation. I call these more conversations than interviews. But one is, are there any other things that you've seen evolved big time when it comes to podcasting? That's the first part.
Yeah, the interesting thing about podcasting is now that you're starting to see a lot of fiction type podcasts. Serial was the first one to really make the mark and have tens of millions of subscribers to it, because it was this. Actually, that wasn't a fiction podcast. That was nonfiction, but it was kind of a drama type podcast. And now you're starting to see a lot of fiction podcasts like Lore and other things coming out. So we're starting to see all kinds of people, not just the tech people, but the people who are getting involved with podcasting. Like you said, anybody can do it now, which is partly the reason. But I think people are now also seeing the benefit of having a podcast of their own to help them with their A, creative outlet, B, with their business. You're even seeing a lot of small businesses start podcasts, from real estate to accountants, anybody who does any coaching, they're all starting podcasts. Why? Because if you're going to be coaching with somebody, that's a big ask, and typically you're going to charge quite a bit for that. But when a person can hear you and understand your style and get a feel of what that might be like to work with you in person, or even get a small win from you on a podcast, well, then they're going to be more likely to go to your website or reach out to you and actually have a transaction with you of some kind. And because of the nature of, like we talked about earlier, the consumption habits and just the intimacy of a podcast, it's so much easier to, quote, sell people. And now, like for me, when I have courses and other things come out, it's not even really selling anymore. You don't have to be aggressive because you're building all that trust and with that person during that time. So it's almost like it's just amazing. And sometimes people start a podcast not even really caring about how many listeners there are, or more so as a platform to interview other people and have conversations with people who they wouldn't have access to before. And a lot of people are using it for that now. Other trends are, more tech trends. You're starting to see podcast apps being built into cars. You're starting to see a lot of other kinds of podcast apps there. Google just recently announced that they're going to, in the next 2 years, this is their goal, double the amount of podcast listeners, because there's so many podcasts now that are out there, which is great. Imagine all the content that's there. Well, Google's job is to organize that content, right? So much like what they're doing with YouTube, because they own YouTube, and getting like the automatic transcriptions and having that play a role in SEO on YouTube, it's going to happen in podcasting too. We're already starting to see Google help us find more podcasts, which is great. But even more than that, I think just the fact that it's a thing that everybody's going to have access to now is the main thing. It's just normal podcast. Like you said, you don't have to sell it anymore. All things are podcasting right now. I was even at a video conference a year ago, and Gary Vaynerchuk was the keynote, and he was telling all of us YouTubers and video people, like, guys, you got to get on audio.
Right. I think he just had an audio conference coming up or something like that too. I happen to see. Meaning just to show you how much he's into that.
Right. And then you see now like Alexa and Spotify is hosting podcasts now. It's the trend. Now, you might be wondering, well, man, is it too late? Like, have I missed the boat? Well, here's the data. There's like 500 million active blogs and 500 million-ish YouTube channels out there. There's still less than 1 million podcasts. There's still less than 1 million podcasts, guys. So although there is mainstream podcasting now, we're still in the early wave of it. And of course, the cream will always rise to the top. And the other thing is we are seeing now like the internet marketing crowd getting into podcasting. So we have been seeing some like, just like back in the day, you'd see websites that were like obviously templated and like crappily put together. We're starting to see some of that in the podcasting world now, which that happens anywhere there's audiences, but iTunes and Google, they're doing a good job of making sure those things don't.
I've seen
that.
I've seen some spam podcasts that have come up. I saw some. Yeah, there's that old saying that marketers ruin everything, right? But it's funny that Pat, a few things that were key there. One, that's exactly how I got started. You know this, and that's how I got started was interviews, because for me, no one knew who the heck I was, but I was able to get access to people because I had a show. Right, having that 4-letter word, which now has become a longer letter word with the word podcast, right, was a great excuse to get, interviews, to make connections, to get almost free consulting to a certain degree, was one of the ways that I started as well. On that note too, Pat, now that it's become more popular, right? And we're talking here mostly people that are listening to the show, that follow me, they're personal brands, Pat. They're different, course creators, personal brands, etc. That's my peeps, right? They're in front of the brand. Podcasting is obviously a no-brainer for this audience, right? But the question is, as it gets more popular, is it now more difficult to build an audience using podcasting? Can you use podcasting for that? Because let me tell you my point. If you're already have an audience from something else, whatever it might be, blogger, YouTuber, you've got your super sexy on Instagram, whatever it is, email list is obviously the number one, right? You're able to move the needle when you come out with something new, whether it's a course, whether it's an ebook, whether it's a podcast. You're coming out with a new podcast. You've got people that already tell about the podcast. Right? But what about those that are getting started? Is podcasting a medium that you can get started from scratch and build an audience on there that then can be leveraged in other ways? Or is it something that now in 2018 is only for people that already have an established audience?
I mean, obviously it helps if you have an audience that you can point a new show to anyway. But I have students every single week emailing me who have started from scratch, because I have my course and I have people come in and they don't have any audiences at all. And they go in and they start like their minds are blown by the fact that by putting out content onto iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play, that it favors the findability of new people too sometimes. And these people who are starting from scratch, they now have, to start, it's going to be like hundreds of listeners, but they're still, I always tell them, just like the analogy you mentioned earlier, like imagine a room full of 200 people. They can do so much with that. And because it's so intimate at the start, what you can do is you can engage with them, you can talk to them and have conversations with them. I always encourage my students to try to get on a Skype call or a Zoom call with their new listeners so they can understand more about who their audience is. And that helps accelerate the growth of the show, because even though they're just talking with one person, that person represents the larger whole of the audience that they're building. So they're able to connect with them better. They're able to empathize. They're able to understand what the pains and problems are and actually address them on the show, which makes their show more relevant to that audience. And plus, here's what's cool about podcasting. Podcasting is consumed very similarly to how Netflix shows and TV shows are consumed. When people hear an episode, they go and then talk about it, like at the water cooler or with their friends. Those of you listening, you might have had somebody in your life tell you, man, have you listened to that podcast? There was this one episode where so-and-so did this. You might have done that with one of David's shows. And I know I do that all the time, especially when I listen to Tim Ferriss or a few other people and they have like some celebrity on the show. I can't help but talk about that with other people too. But yeah, you can start from scratch, and that there are many ways that a person who has a show can leverage the fact that they have a podcast. Like just the fact that you have a podcast, like we were talking about, you can use that as leverage to get in front of audiences that normally you wouldn't be able to get in front of, to build that audience. And it's just really cool because, small wins up front matter, and they motivate you to do bigger things and take bigger risks and get bigger results.
Yeah, I think it really elevates people because of that word show or that word podcast, right? I mean, I think immediately if you tell someone, let's just say someone I'm just talking about a complete beginner here, Pat. A beginner, but they've decided that they want to be a dog trainer, right? So they're gonna interview dogs. No, that's probably not a good idea. But they're gonna do a podcast. That's gonna be a good one. Someone's gonna do it, by the way, at some point. Someone's gonna interview a dog. It's probably already been done. But there
are podcasts about not interviewing the dogs, but they interview the owners of dogs for sure.
Well, I guarantee you someday someone's gonna interview a dog. It's not gonna be great, but they're gonna do it. But let's just say that there's a Dogcast. So let's just say someone wants to do something like that and they're thinking, they're not going to interview the dog, but they're going to do dog training tips. So they're going to bring on different, dog trainers or, equipment manufacturers, all kinds of things you could do, right? I'm thinking when that person, and let's just say they're just getting started with this. They're just kind of figuring this out, just by saying they have that show and going through, and again, your process in your course is incredible. I'm a student of it as well. And that's how I relaunched my show. But I'm assuming that, once you kind of put your flag in the ground that you're going to do the dog talking hour or whatever it might be, already now you're ahead of 99.9% of the other beginners and the other people getting started, and even people that have been in the industry, because now already there's credibility associated with that. I don't know exactly how or why, but it's just true. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And plus you get authority through association from the people you interview, like our good friend Johnny Dumas, for example, right? Like he started out not as an entrepreneur, but interviewing entrepreneurs. And of course, he did it 7 days a week. And he's interviewed 2,000. But he is now seen through association with all those entrepreneurs. And plus, he is now learning at the same time. And he's an amazing entrepreneur, and he's helped a lot of people. You can do that. Plus, here's the other thing. You can have the fact that you have a podcast help you get on other shows. Other podcasters love to interview other podcasters because not just the equipment's there and they know what the process is like, but I think that there's an understanding in the podcasting world about why this happens. And, the podcasting community is very friendly with each other. People like to, just like YouTubers like to bring other YouTubers on their shows. It's very similar in the podcasting space. And here's the trick. I'm just going to give it to you. If you know what your specialty is, you can leverage that to get on your quote competitor's podcast. So let's do dog training. Let's say I'm a dog trainer specifically for super aggressive dogs that will bite you. Like that's my specialty as a dog trainer, right? And I'm known as that. I'm like, that's the name of my show, and I help people through that. I can get on a very popular dog training podcast that already exists because they're likely not focusing just on that. They're likely focusing on a lot of things. But I can go in and say, hey, Johnny, I know you have this podcast helping people. I want to come in and help your audience. You always approach it as a value add, not a value take. I have a specialty with dogs that are just overly aggressive. And I know that, some of your audience may have that, maybe not, but one day their dogs could turn into that. I want to be there to help them. So what do you say? I'd love to be on your show and help you and your audience understand if you have a really, really crazy dog, how you can begin to start helping that person. And this person, because that's not their specialty, like a podcaster's job is not just to deliver information, but to find the people who can deliver the right information. And if you become that person, now all of a sudden I'm on that show. I have the credibility through the association with that host who is bringing me on. And now the targeted people in that audience who do have a super aggressive dog are going to come my way and start listening to my show.
And I think not only is that right on the money, Pat, the bigger thing there, which is not only a trend, but it's just the reality of the world now, is that the more niche you can get, the more opportunity that there is. The riches are in the niches, my friend. And I say this all the time, and this is true of courses. This is true of brands. This is true of podcasts. This is true of whatever, ebooks, right? Whatever it might be, because the more you could get down, then you can market towards these broad people, right? Meaning you could go on those shows like the dog trainer. Like if you had a broad dog training show about dog training everything, it'd be very hard to then approach a big dog trainer and say, hey, I just talk about everything related to dog training just like you do. Please have me on, right?
Right. Or even from a listener, like, hey, I have a golden retriever, but you train all kinds of dogs. I'm going to go to the one that has the golden retriever podcast because that's me.
Exactly. And we've talked about like with courses, and we've talked about that for years. We've teamed up on webinars, Pat, now for years. And one of the examples we give with courses, which is the exact same as podcasts, is the example of Mark Dawson, who, hey, there's a million Facebook ads courses out there. There's one Facebook ads for authors. You're an author. Which one are you buying? Right? Every random Facebook ads course or Facebook ads for authors. That's how the real success in this industry. So thank you, Pat, for that note. Now, on a few more podcast related things here, frequency. You have more shows than any human will probably ever have with 5. But how do you like to think about frequency, maybe for yourself or for other people? Like, how important is frequency? Because you mentioned the JLD who was out of his mind, and he's certainly pared back from that now. But JLD said, listen, I'm going crazy. I'm a unique, crazy unicorn, and I'm going to do 7 days of shows a week. And JLD's done a great job with that. That is a very intimidating prospect. I think JLD and maybe 3 other people in the world could probably pull that off. Do you know what I mean? I'm not one of them. That I can promise you.
Yeah. I mean, podcasting is not easy. It takes some work, especially in the beginning when you're learning the process. And then eventually you want to, potentially get to the point where you hand off a lot of that work. And that's how John was able to do that. Like, first of all, he batch processed all of his interviews on Tuesday, which I would recommend batch processing in general. But then he would give those to a VA who would then set everything up. So it wasn't all him, but it was a lot of work for sure.
Understood. But for normal humans, not John Lee Dumas's,
right?
What's a good way to look at frequency? Because people, I even get hung up on this a little bit, Pat, too, because I've done everything. When I had my old show, I did one that was very frequent. I had a 5-day a week at one point. I had 3-day a week at one point. Now with this podcast, for now, it's 1 day a week. I would not. This is just me right here. I would not want to go more than 1 day a week because I don't want to kill my audience. Do you know what I mean? And they have a lot else going on with their businesses. They've got other things going on. Once a week for me coming in on a podcast, good to go. But we've always even played with we're not necessarily doing this. I'm just telling you what's in my brain right now. This is like a brain dump. Is that sometimes we've even played with like, what if we went less than that? What if we decided that we're going to go every other week or things like, we've played with different ideas. And I just want to hear from you as someone that's had, again, the gamut of shows with all these things. What's kind of your thoughts or philosophy on frequency?
So frequency is less important than consistency. There are super popular podcasts where the episodes come out every other week. And like I said in the beginning, when I started, it was every other week. And I still got a lot of great results from that. Now, I did pick it up because I was seeing the results, and I borrowed time from blogging and put it into podcasting to get to 1 day a week. at that point. Now, there are podcasts that have, this might sound crazy, but there's a podcast called Hardcore History. And I think it comes out every 4 months, one episode every 3 or 4 months. But it's super popular and it's consistent. And it builds so much buzz and anticipation for each episode that helps for him. But his episodes are like 5 hours long because they go super deep into like Genghis Khan or, the full story about each, character in history. But that's his show and that's how he wants to do it. I would say that in terms of frequency, do it as, get into a cadence that makes sense for you and the lifestyle that you have and keep it consistent if you can. Now, that's not to say that you can't create a podcast and then it's going to die the moment you stop. The Food Trucker podcast, I haven't added a new podcast episode in over a year for that. Yet it still continues to get like 2,000 to 3,000 downloads a month because iTunes and Google, all the search engines are going to help you too. I know some people who have used podcasting specifically to promote and build buzz for their upcoming book launch. So they will go pretty hardcore, like 30 days of podcast for 30 days before their book launch. But they're providing so much value that by the time the book launches and, they've teased it, they mentioned it, and then boom, the book launches on that day. Like it's just a firestorm on that day and people go crazy and they can't help but want to buy it and share it because a person has built this relationship with them. But it's funny, you go back 2 years later, you're still seeing that is still pushing book sales or clients. So you can have a finite amount of episodes. But if you want more exposure, then of course staying consistent. And I would say, once a week is a good place to start. And if you can't do that, then once every other week is a great place to start. And you can see how it works for you and start to ramp it up if you want. Where you get into trouble is if like 1 week you come out with 3 episodes, the next week you miss it, and then the week after that you come out with one. And
right, then it just causes audience confusion there, and then they don't know, and whatever it might be. I always like to try to own a day and a time kind of type of situation. Like for us right now, it's Tuesdays, and the new episodes go out at 9 a.m. Central, right? And that's and I think people do start to anticipate that.
Oh, dude, they do. And here's an example. So I come out with my shows on Wednesday. People will be habitually listening to your show so much that you'll have a number of people who will look for it when it comes out. And if you don't come out on that time, like people will be upset. Like I just want to warn you. Like it's just like, if you're expecting a TV show to come out and then, there was a different show on, like what's going on here? I had a person reach out to me on a Thursday because I had missed my Wednesday deadline. And the subject line was, Pat, it's Thursday, in all caps. And then the subject line was, Pat, where the F word is episode, I think it was 112 or something. And then it followed up with, by the way, I love your stuff. Thanks. It was so funny. Like I share that all the time in presentations because it's just like you create those fans who love you, but will like, they need you. They need your show. It's so cool.
Yeah, and I've experienced that firsthand on both ends of that too, by the way, where I saw someone that I liked a show and it didn't come out. I was like, what? What? Are they, seriously, if they disappeared and fell off a cliff, could they have at least published the episode first? Do you know what I mean? I'm sitting here. But yeah, that's a great point in terms of consistency. And I think, that's true of so many things in business, so many things in online business, that's where a lot of people fail, is that they're able to do wind sprints, but they're not able to do things consistently.
Apple is now helping us. They are allowing us to have seasons, which this is largely due to like Serial and a few other shows that have come out that are more seasonal, like TV shows. So you can structure your show in a way where you have one episode a week coming out for 10 weeks, and then that's the end of season 1, and that gives you some breathing room before season 2 comes out. You can create buzz, and then the next 10 episodes come out in season 2. Some people are experimenting with doing it Netflix style in that way with seasons, but by just releasing all 10 episodes on a certain date, and that's working well for some people too. So there is some wiggle room there for us, so we don't get into that hamster wheel of content.
Got it.
Creation.
So just pay attention and see the market continues to evolve. There could be all kinds of cool opportunities, which is also very exciting. Which also leads to this, Pat, is you mentioned with JLD batching. I want to talk to you about this. You have 5 shows now. You've got your online courses. You've got children. You've got I was going to say wives. You've got a wife. You've got you this year. I know you're big into YouTube too. You're doing a lot of YouTube stuff. You're a content machine, to say the least. How do you personally deal with that? Because I mean, how do you create so much content? I mean, because to me, I create a fair amount of content. You create way more than me. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I don't know how the heck this guy does it. He must be half man, half machine. But I'm just curious, what's your kind of system for that?
Yeah, well, batch processing is part of that, and having specific days where specific things are done. So I have a day of the week where it is all podcasts all day, meaning I record my shows, I interview for other people's shows, people come onto my show. That's all happening on one day. Same thing with video. That's Tuesday. So Caleb, my videographer, and I, we go to the video studio. We batch record, a week or two's worth of videos, and then we're ahead. And then, we constantly try to stay ahead of schedule. So with the podcast, for example, because of batch processing, right now we're recording this in May, right? It's May. I'm already recorded for the SPA podcast through August. And so I can have some breathing room. Now I still stay on top of the schedule, and obviously part of this involves planning. So the editorial calendar and planning ahead is a really important component of this. And so I try to get ahead on that. And in my other shows, like with AskPat, we're already recorded through July. And so I can have the time and the bandwidth to focus on, the launches of my online courses that are coming up, or an event that might be going on. And, when I see that I have an important launch coming up, then maybe I double down on the podcast just to give myself a little bit of breathing room weeks in advance, so that by the time I'm needed for something else. Same thing with vacations and, all those kinds of things. So batch processing, planning ahead, and then also definitely now utilizing my team. I definitely wouldn't be able to do that many shows without my team. I had run the podcast, the Smart Passive Income podcast, on my own for 5 years, just me, show notes, images, editing everything, all me for 5 years. And I really enjoyed it. I actually fell in love with the process. And it wasn't until I came out with AskPat and got a little bit of taste of what it was like, because that show wouldn't happen unless somebody else helped. And I got a taste for it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm saving so much time. Now I'm gonna outsource Smart Passive Income now, and all I do now is just record my voice, upload it to Dropbox, and then I'm done. But it wasn't always like that.
It's same and same, by the way, same and same. I mean, I did my original show that I did almost 500 episodes of was all me, all of them. And now it's exactly that. Hired an editor too. But I think also I want people to take away from this too, Pat, that not to get intimidated by, I mean, you've built up over time. You enjoy this, you create tons of different content. Don't try to go from, nothing overnight to 5 shows and being Pat and doing those things. Like, please, Lord, we don't have time for the counseling that we're gonna have to deal with you after that. Don't do that. Just one solid thing that you can do consistently is going to make the difference. I mean, just one show, you say, hey, this is what we're going to do, and stick with it. And Pat, I'm curious too, because you've done so many different types of shows. You've done the Smart Passive Income show. You've got the Ask Pat show. Now you got a show with the little one, different things like that. Have you done any kind of pivots along the way that you think were instrumental to either the show's success or just your success as podcasting in general? I mean, were there any things that you made a big or small shift that you saw changes over time that worked out well for you?
Wow, great question. So let me talk about AskPat really quick, because there was definitely a significant pivot into something else. So I did 1,000 episodes of that.
Oh, just 1,000, just a warm 1,000, quick 1,000.
So that was 2014. And the cool thing about that episode was I used a tool called SpeakPipe, SpeakPipe.com, which allowed people, my audience.
They can drop questions and stuff. They can record themselves, right?
Right. So they drop me a question. What's cool about that tool is it gives it to me in an MP3, so I can just drop it into my editor, and then I answer it. And so it's like I'm having this conversation with my audience. So they ask a question, I answer it, and then I have a sponsor at the end of the episode. So I do make a couple $100 per episode on that, which is pretty cool too. And then everybody enjoys it. And now it's in my library is something. If somebody asks me a question that I remember or have on file from AskPat, I go, oh yeah, I actually answered this question. You're not the only one that had this question too. And now people feel like they're part of the community and all that stuff. It's a really cool format. But after 1,000 episodes, I realized that a lot of the questions were the same. We're starting to become the same after that many. And the hard part about that was I knew that in order to better help those people who had questions, that I wish I could follow up and ask questions back and have a conversation with them. So actually starting in episode 1001, we took about a 2-month break. And then in episode 1001 was my first Ask Pat coaching call. So Ask Pat became not a pre-recorded conversation, but one that was like an interview.
I love it. But it was like doing a live, or if you will, coaching session with someone.
Exactly. It's exactly that. And then in exchange for the, because I charge a lot for coaching, but this is free. In exchange for that, I can publish that episode and people listen to it. And people have been like going crazy with that. But the result, the numbers are up because of that, because it's just more interesting. But more than that, it's helped me become a better coach, just forcing myself and putting myself in that situation. So it's very different than an interview. I'm forced to go in and help. But what happens is people see what it's like to work with me through my coaching with other people. And I recently released what's called the SPI Accelerator Program, which is a high-level mastermind where I do coaching like that. And it was a very easy sell because people can go and listen to me from those episodes. So, giving people a taste like we talked about earlier, and then selling something that for people who want to go deeper and want the personalization, man, it's been a really cool shift to see. And I'm a lot more confident now as a one-on-one coach, which I had never done before. So I actually use the podcast as a way to learn how to do something which I had never done before.
Pat, on that, I was actually thinking about doing this, and by that I mean completely stealing that idea. And I'll tell you why. And I'm sure you're going to support it, but I actually had that exact same thought because, I get questions from my Create Awesome Online Courses students, like some stuff like, hey, I'm trying to figure out my topic, like great things that could be a full episode, And I was thinking, you think I should probably do that. I don't know why I would not, right?
I mean, try it. Here's the other cool thing about podcasting. It's really open to do whatever you want. It's your palette. I mean, it's your canvas, and your palette's just your voice and your mind. So you can just experiment. Try one episode and go, hey guys, we're doing a little experiment on this episode. I'm taking one of my course students in CAOC. She's been having a little bit of trouble with defining what her course outcome is, because we all know how important the outcome and the transformation of a course is. So we're going to jam for 30 minutes, and hopefully through this, if you're in the course, you'll be like, all right, now I get it. And if you're not in the course, maybe this, maybe you will want to be a part of it too, or I don't know. But
yeah, I love it. And by the way, thank you for mentioning that too about experimenting, because that was one of the fun things for me too. I mean, one of the reasons I got back into it is that I was like, you know what, I'm going to get back into podcasting, but I'm going to do it the way I want to freaking do it. Meaning, if I want to experiment and do some with interviews and some coaching and some solo episodes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have fun with the medium. I'm going to be consistent in terms of our publishing and things like that too, and also the topics, but allowing some of that creative wiggle room, I think, is really what makes this kind of fun,
For sure, man. And just, again, the medium of podcasting, just like how hopefully y'all listening right now are having fun listening to us.
Absolutely. So, all right, Pat, one more question, one more little topic to cover, and then we're going to talk about our upcoming free workshop that I am so pumped about, that we're going to tell people about in a second. But one more question too, and we kind of alluded to this throughout this entire conversation, but I want to see if you had any tips or further thoughts on that. And that is literally selling on a podcast. Is it appropriate? Is it possible? Do you have any kind of thoughts or tips that you could give on that? And then we'll talk workshop.
You can sell directly. Like if you have a program, you can sell it directly on your show. But there are so many things that a podcast can do for you that will allow for higher conversions and less aggressive marketing. I know a lot of people struggle with selling, and they don't want to upset people or turn into the dark side, right? I mean, you can sell your own programs. A lot of people mention their own programs at the end of their show, or mention an application or a coaching program at the end of their podcast. You can obviously sell things with sponsorships and things like that. The best kind of selling that a podcast is perfect for is when you are not doing the selling of the thing that you want people to buy. Example. So I launched one of my online courses, and I planned ahead of time, and I knew that I wanted the podcast to support the launch of my online course. So I used earlier episodes in the month, because I was promoting it at the end of the month. I used the earlier episodes in the month to talk about the topic, to really cover a lot of the objections that people had and the myths around that thing, and specifically, why it was good to get involved in that particular space. It was my podcasting course that I was selling. So I talked about why podcasting is great for beginners, and a lot of the things we talked about today. The next episode was how you can potentially build a business with your podcast. So more money-driven specific things, which I knew was a big want for a lot of my audience who were wanting to be on the podcast. Now, the week that the online course launched, we had planned this ahead. Midweek, Wednesday, a podcast episode featuring 3 of my students who were in my beta program. I interviewed 3 different people, and they were all in a single episode. And it wasn't them talking directly about the course. I asked them questions about what it was like to get started as a podcaster, what some of their biggest struggles were, but also what some of the cool wins they had. Just like we had Dr. B on there, one of my students who created a podcast to help people with ADHD. She now has a podcast that's listened to in over 40 countries. And she talked about that. She has this little map. She's like 65 years old. She has this map above her computer. And every time she sees a new country where her podcast was listened to, she puts a pin up. And people got really inspired by that. And a younger person and then a male. And that episode, of course, naturally, my course is going to pop up because they're my students. They're selling it for me through their own experience, them sharing their own wins. So for all of you online course creators out there, imagine interviewing your successful students on your show and having them talk about just naturally how great your course is, the outcomes that came out of that. That podcast episode converted 60% of the overall students that came in during that run. And it continues to promote that course because that podcast is evergreen. It puts people into a wait list in between launches.
That's what I was going to ask you, is that what was kind of the call to action there? Was the call to action like, hey, go to this link if you're now interested in podcasting and you want to take the next step and you want to learn more about the course, blank.
That's exactly it.
And if it's open, it's open. And if it's not, then it goes to the wait list.
Exactly. And man, that I have people come up to me and go, that episode with this person who told that story about, and I know you talked about, I know your course was mentioned there, but I really connected with her and that's why I came in. And I was like, man, that's huge. So just think about that as a course creator. You know what I mean?
And by the way, what you did there too, and this is just interesting, this is a fun experiment for everyone to check out, is Pat, you went directly also to like a sale there. You didn't then skip over, then go to like, let's say a webinar or something else. I mean, you literally gave like a link to purchase, right?
Right. I mean, you can experiment with doing
sure,
a
but
to a
I'm
webinar.
telling you, we actually do this in my ebook, and it's working out extremely well. Pat, just a fun fact is that the exact same method. I mean, we have the ebook, and then at the end of the ebook, and we have the webinars listed, and you can go sign up for a webinar too. At the end of the ebook, they can unlock a special offer for Create Awesome Online Courses. Directly right there. And by the way, that is crushing. Fun fact. And that was just something we tried on a whim. So anyway, great thoughts there on exactly how to do that. And we bring students on, and your students are, for everyone that's listening to this, I mean, that's gold content right there. Gold content, because it's number one, it's incredible, obviously, Pat, for marketing, right? Because you're bringing on, it's social proof, it's all these things. It's also great content for students that are already in your course. Right? Because now they're like, oh my God. Oh, I recognize, Sam from the Facebook group. And now he's in here talking to Pat. Oh, this is great. I mean, it motivates people more inside your course. And at the end of the day, as we all know, as course creators, that's the end goal, is we want people to get results from our course, right? That adds great content for them. And that's like a dual-headed lion, Pat. I don't know what we call them. Let's call it a dual-headed lion. The marketing lion and the helping your students lion is the double lion. Okay? The double lion. Write that down, folks. Very important. Now, Pat, this is awesome stuff here today. I mean, we could talk podcasting for the next 200 hours. We're not, because I'm sure you have at least 600 episodes you need to shoot today. So I want to make sure that we can keep a little bit of your voice. But I am very excited that we are teaming up and doing a workshop together. And let me just give the context to everyone on this, is that when I relaunched my podcast, Pat was one of the main people, of course, that I reached out to, because Pat has now, been doing this and really mastered it. And what, Pat, I love about you and your teaching style, which has always been the same with Smart Passive Income and anything you teach, is that you break it down in the same way I try to teach as well. Breaking it down very simply, especially in places where people get stuck and they think, and because that's the big problem, is not knowing what to do. So we're going to be doing a free webinar, free workshop coming up here. I'm going to give the context. It's going to be Tuesday, June 12th at noon Pacific. Tuesday, June 12th at noon Pacific. If you're going there after that, you missed it. Maybe we'll have some kind of missed it link. I don't know. Check that out. But it's Tuesday, June 12th, noon Pacific. We're going to be live. The link is therisetothetop.com/learn2podcast. And we'll have that in the show notes as well. therisetothetop.com/learn2podcast. Now, Pat, got to ask you here as we wrap up, what can people expect here from this webinar, from this workshop? I know it's going to be top notch as it is, but why don't you let people know what's going to be going on here?
Yeah, well, just to give you a preview, I mean, the name of it is, 9 strategies to creating, promoting, and monetizing a successful podcast that grows your influence and income. And I know you guys, a lot of you have online courses, obviously, so there'll be an emphasis on that. And then how that relates to even just the decisions to name your podcast, really how technically it works and how technically easy it is, and the equipment that you need to sound like a pro without spending a ton of money. And then additionally, how to get listeners and how to keep it growing even after you launch, those kinds of things we're going to talk about. Monetization, obviously. I mean, we just touched on one of the several strategies I'll be sharing today, which is like, bringing your students on your show. But I got a lot more in the bag for you guys. I hope you guys join us.
Cool. So again, that's going to be the risetop.com/learn-to-podcast. We will be live. We will be rocking it out. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, you know what? Maybe I want to do a podcast, absolutely for you. If you're sitting there thinking, I don't know, I'm a little on the fence, I'm not sure yet, maybe I just want to learn more, totally for you. If you're 100% sure you want to do one, absolutely for you. And also, by the way, Pat, if you have a podcast, right? Maybe you got one started and you're still kind of figuring it out and how to leverage it. Absolutely come on as well, because there's going to be strategies really for anyone. I mean, right? If you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, no matter where you're at, have an audience, no audience, course, no course, it's fine. Come on. Pat has seen it and heard it all. He's going to be able to teach you, and it's going to be a great, great session. So again, the risetop.com/learn-to-podcast. And you can find out more, of course, check out everything Pat at smartpassiveincome.com is probably the best place to send everyone, right?
Yeah, definitely. Everything is connected there.
All right. Cool, man. Well, thanks, Pat, for coming on. This was awesome as usual, and we will see you at the live session. This has been Pat Flynn, my great and good friend, the one and only Pat Flynn, Dr. Professor DDS, here on the Rise to the Top podcast. I will see you guys at the live workshop. And remember, if you want some fluff, you know what to do. Go pet a bunny. The end.
I'm a beaver. I want it to Daddy. All the way to the top. Bye-bye.